the prophetic process versus the creative process. You can see this if you contrast the prophets in the Bible with modern day inventors or people who have brought to pass marvelous discoveries. One, the prophets of the Bible, were men who had the discipline to hear God's voice. They didn't relate to him. Now, if you're coming from a Bible point of view, the prophet saw God as a person. Though he exists spiritually separate and apart from the visible world, he is a personality. He communicates to us on a human, interactive, emotional level. He understands us. Even though he is outside of creation itself, he still is responsible for creation, and man is part of that creation. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and as you read the story and go drill down a little bit deeper, you see that he made man in his own image and his own likeness. He breathed into him the breath of life, and man became a living soul. He was and is the only creature on earth that has the likeness of God. In that, he was wired, created, to hear God's voice, to communicate with God as a person, not nature, not the sky, not something impersonal, but to create and to talk to God on a level of words and emotions and not just perception, but God. Ultimately, if you see the Bible story, God became man, took on flesh, and walked among us. We beheld his glory, the glory of the only begotten Son of God, Jesus, the living Son of the living God, that kind of thing. But that's right now, I'm not going to drill that deep to help you understand the redemption story. Right now, the real process that I'm trying to expose is the difference between the prophetic and the creative. Two different processes. One, God talks to me. God discloses information to me. God simply gives me answers. God gives me instruction. God tells me what's to come. That's information that I can't come up with. I can't meditate and derive an answer. Prophetic insight is something that is spoken, given, supplied. It is outside of me. The creative process is something that I am designed to do. I am wired to do it from the very beginning of time. Mankind, being created in the image and nature of God, was given the ability to create. That is a marvelous concept, and we are just now or still scratching the surface or coming up with an understanding of the capability, human potential. It is awesome. But the difference between the prophets of the Old Testament or the prophets in the Bible, they were able to hear God's voice distinct from their own voice. They heard God's voice distinct from their own thoughts and their own mind. When you understand the prophetic voice of the Bible, these men are not saying, I thought of this, it came to me, I feel. It was not some intuition that they took a hunch and began to speak. No, the prophetic process is God communicating his desire, his thoughts, his insights to men. The creative process is man taking advantage of his wiring, his ability to see something in his own heart, mind, and spirit, or creative idea, vision, and then translate what he sees into something tangible that we all can benefit from. We can hold it in our hands, we can use it. It becomes a product, it becomes a process, it becomes an invention. That is one of the gifts of creativity. God wired us that way. When we look at a prophet who can see the future, he's not some uniquely mystical person with an organ somewhere that can tap into something that is not seen and yet to come. He's being told by someone who can see the future. He's being given that information. It comes from outside of himself. So the prophets of the Bible were people or men who walked with God. And when you begin to study them, not just study around them, but actually read the Bible and understand their interaction with God, you'll see that these men were not they were even distinct from other prophets from other cultures. These prophets were prophets of the Most High God. These prophets were the prophets of the living God. These prophets were the spokesman for the only God, and they distinguished themselves from other prophets by saying things like that. And God distinguished himself from other concepts of God by showing his might, his power, and his compassion, and his ability to call a thing that is not as though it is, to see the future and then communicate that information to a man that does not have the capability to do such things. The creative process is what we admire that, because I got to say this, and I don't mean it to be insulting, but most of the world doesn't believe in God, the living God, the God of the Bible. We talk a lot about God, but when you really drill down and try to get behind their talk about God, is essentially a being that is faceless, without a personality. He's a force, he's power. They don't ascribe personality to him. They'll call him something other than the living God, the only God, the God of the Most High. They don't refer to God that way that you hear him referred to in the Bible. They refer to him as infinite intelligence or something like that. But that's not the God of the Bible. The creative process is this wonderful process, this wiring that was given to us, built into us, to be able to take full advantage of this wonderful planet or the universe that's been already stocked and supplied with everything you will ever think and everything you will ever need. Earth and the universe has already been pre-supplied with everything that we will ever need to sustain our being and our imagination. This is the power of God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And God placed man on the earth. And God gave man the responsibility to till it, to take care of it, to replenish it, to be fruitful and to multiply. This was not uniquely man's inward desire to be curious and come up with all these things. He was wired to do so. And again, if I'm talking to people that don't believe in God, you're going to have a problem with this concept, because God doesn't figure into most of the human potential concepts that we have today. He may be included in word or in name, God, the unknown God, the indescribable God, but I'm talking about a God who has identified himself through the Bible, who's named himself and who's declared his love for mankind. John 3:16, if you have, for God so loved the world, that God. Jesus, the image of the invisible God in Colossians, that God. So obviously, if you don't track with me on who I believe God is and who I believe the Bible says God is, you may have some difficulty, wrapping your head around or your arms around this concept of the prophetic process versus the creative process. But if you really appreciate the creative process, at least you'll understand and appreciate that we were wired to be wonderful, to be incredibly resourceful. We were wired that way. We shouldn't be surprised at the things we develop, because we were wired that way. If God is the maker of heaven, the heavens and the earth and every galaxy and every star, if this being, God, is able to do that, and he, that being, formed us, made us in his image and his likeness, and breathed into us this breath of life, and we became a living soul. We became that being, we became that living soul because of his desire, because of his design. We were made like him, we were made by him, we were made for him. But as I said earlier in a previous teaching, we departed from the script. And we severed our relationship, our ability to hear him directly, that prophetic voice, that directive voice that comes directly from God to us. The ability to hear his voice as clearly as I can hear my friends, my neighbor's voice. But that dimension to us, that spiritual dimension that connects us to him, has been damaged and broken. It is like an organ being damaged and it can't function. If your sight was damaged in an accident, you are not able to see. Well, clearly try to use that example. that there is a dimension to us as humans, given to us, designed into us to be able to hear God as clearly as we can hear each other. That was damaged by the fall from man's relationship with God. This is not a Bible study, but hopefully we'll in the future get and drill down into the scriptures that help us understand that God made a great effort to reestablish that communication between mankind and himself. And if we would do what he has prescribed, we would hear him again as clearly as we were designed to hear him in the beginning. But the prophetic process, again, is the prophets of the Old Testament: Elijah, Elisha, Isaiah, Hosea, Jeremiah. All of these men were able to hear God's instructions. They were able to hear his voice, whether they heard it audibly or whether they heard it resonate in them so strongly, they were able to distinguish his voice from their voice. And they were able to take action as though it were outside instructions, not just a figment of their imagination. The prophetic voice is very distinct from the voices that we have residing and resonating in our own heads. And prophets of the Bible were able to distinguish their voice from God's voice. But now when you look at the creative process and you think about all the wonderful things we enjoy today: electricity, light, telecommunications, we launch satellites, we travel from planet Earth to the moon or send probes to Mars. All of these things we were capable of doing all along. Did you know that perhaps we were capable of flight or the discovery of such things in 1 AD, but didn't come about until 1900 years later? But this is the creative process. You'd probably be surprised, amazed, and delighted when you realize that if we would give ourselves to the creative process, we could take leaps beyond where we are today. And it wouldn't threaten God a bit, because we were wired to be that brilliant, that creative, that beautiful. But this struggle between religion and science is really at its core the misconception or the lack of understanding that there are two processes: a prophetic process where God communicates his mind to our mind, and the creative process where we consult among ourselves, or we go within ourselves and picture, visualize, conceptualize something wonderful, and then submit to the process to bring that wonderful thing into a place where we can see, hear, taste, touch, handle, and benefit from it.